sign in. So this is just terrific that you're all able to come. Usually while people are signing in for these next 35 seconds, I talk about the COVID situation. And remember that we're still suffering around 1,800 deaths per day in the United States. So it's still very serious. I am still wearing masks in congregate settings, particularly when I go into retail spaces. If you look at people in restaurants and so on, they're interacting with us all so often. And so I just try to be considerate. I know that the pandemic is actually coming down, but I try to be considerate of others as I can. And of course, I'm encouraging people to get vaccinated. The thing that is really driving the attention of the entire world is what's going on in the Ukraine. And it's just such a tragedy that's unfolding and so unnecessary. There is a sense of powerlessness that can pervade, but we're not powerless. We can talk about it. We can contribute our treasure, we can contribute our time, we can contribute our voice, we can contribute our advocacy. And let's remember that those little things that we do every day, who we do business with, what products we buy, what bank we use, we're actually voting for the kind of society that we're going to have in the future. So when we are purchasing a product, we're actually making a political statement along with a personal choice. And we can change our personal choices in small ways to try and bend the arc of our society toward justice and toward tolerance. One of the things we'll be talking about is how do we listen to each other, and instead of getting into confrontations that can end tragically, how do we deal with depression, and we'll be doing that during this show and in others as well. So we're going to have a great discussion today. Please contribute your suggested questions. They always are very helpful. We've just joined a Twitter Live, YouTube Live, and Facebook Live. So let's get the show on the road. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, decision leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're discussing the important topic of youth and teen mental health care, resources, and needs with special guests. Marico Sayoc, Executive Director of CASSY, Counseling and Support Services for Youth, and David Mineta, President and CEO of Momentum for Health in California. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we'll take 3 snap polls during the show, and we'll announce results, and questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you for joining us. Marico, you're still trying to sign on, I see. There we go. It's just great to have you here. We're gonna set this up. We're gonna go over to you, Marico, first, and I'll just set this up by saying that the COVID situation has really caused us to appreciate the mental health impact of daily events that we have. And it really has hit our youth really hard. We're also beginning to understand that there is a intrinsic connection between mental health, behavioral health, and physical health, how that affects us. And we're even doing research in which we have proved that trauma, stress, and so on can actually affect our DNA's development, and messages can be transmitted that affect behavior across generations. So treatments start to have to consider what has happened to our parents and our grandparents as well. So let's talk a little bit about this vulnerable time, sort of teenage adolescence. And Marico, could you just give us a quick overview of the kind of services that you provide? Then we're going to get into some of the issues that I just mentioned. But talk a little bit about CASSY and how you came to be and the scope of your activities today.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me today. And I look forward to spending the morning with both you and David. So I think I'm going to just touch on and reemphasize what you just said, Mark. Unmet mental health needs have a strong impact on a student's academic performance and their social and emotional development. And CASSY started in 2009 to really address that problem. We have shown since our beginning that students are far more likely to seek counseling when counseling is on their campus. When they see their therapist on a regular basis and you weave mental health support into a daily curriculum, similar to what many schools have already done with PE, physical education. We are in preschools through high schools in San Mateo and Santa Clara County. Our therapists are located right on campus, and so they are just like staff and support and understand the community and the culture within each of our schools.
So it's also separately funded, right? It's separately funded, separately staffed.
Correct.
What you're doing is you're creating within a school a treatment capability.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And so we can, and depending on what the school wants, we can do, and depending on the age, it's very age appropriate. We can do group counseling, school presentations, or individual one-on-one counseling, depending on the needs. And then what we also do that's vital is that we provide a triage. So we determine, is this appropriate for school-based counseling? There's cases that are not. And then we then work with them to seek outside resources, such as Momentum, such as other agencies, so that they have the appropriate care outside of that school environment. So we're that warm handoff. Huh?
So for this approach to be successful, David, you really need to get to the point where these types of interactions are destigmatized, right? I mean, we really have to get to the point where, as CASSY has described it, the approach to mental health is kind of integrated into our daily lives, in this particular case, schools, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, I appreciate, again, this opportunity, Mark, to be on, you know, talking about this. You know, I in some ways, it's hard to think of something more important right now than our young folks' mental wellness. And, you know, actually in this discussion, I would also include mental health as well as substance use disorder as well. Age of onset for both is around the same time, same, you know, developmentally around the same time. So, you know, and because it is, and age of onset is typically in you know, the mid-teen years, that is a time of such sort of development where your peers and your social network really matter so much to you. And highly stigmatized issues are tough to get at and you know, to speak on and to really go out and get help for. So, you know, as Marico said, I think it's so key to have services on campus. I mean, it's just, you know, I would just say that I feel like my own kids, when they needed services, again, when it was on campus, the school supported it, there was a climate for it, was, you know, made such a difference.
Let's start to unpack sort of the dimensions of stress that can lead to mental health issues. As you're going into your teens, you're making the transition from being a cared for child with the consciousness of a child toward the consciousness of an adult. You're starting to think about your responsibilities more towards others and to your family. Right, so you're now shifting your role. You think about your own identity. You might be dealing with issues that you were unconscious of earlier, whether it's race or your physical height or your sexuality or your maturity in different ways. Your body is changing. Right, you might be dealing with peer pressures that you hadn't really thought of before when you were playing on swing sets and playgrounds, right? There's so much here. And then you pile on issues of budding awareness of COVID and masks and how to keep yourself safe and your grandparents safe. And there's so many different issues. How do you untangle this complexity that young people are encountering, Marico? How do you meet people where they are? Because you just don't know, right? Each person has these different intersecting issues and no, you can't just deal with young people as if they were a clustered group, right? Where you're standing in front of people and you say, okay, we all have the same problem here. We don't all have the same problem. We all have completely individual constellations of concern.
I mean, absolutely. What you've just said there is what a typical teen is going through, and that those concerns are going younger and younger. And so it's not just actually teens. We're seeing more and more of this anxiety in elementary schools, but we do it in several approaches. And we do it in what we call 3 tiers. The first tier is just that preventative. We do a lot of presentations so that at a snapshot, students understand that what they're feeling is what every other person is feeling right now, and then providing an avenue for them to seek resources and support.
You're not alone. That's your
Absolutely.
first message. You're not alone.
Absolutely. And then we go into what we call our tier 2, where those that want to talk more but aren't necessarily ready to go into that individual counseling, those are our tier 2 group counseling. And then tier 3, where we do that intense weekly counseling that is what based on a specific issue, and what you typically find either in private practice or if you were to go to a clinic. But meeting them where they're at and where they're comfortable is the key to our success, because a child, as we all know, you can ask, how are you doing? And you'll get the typical fine, but unless you have the patience to wait until they're ready to say something beyond fine, I think that's where we need to be patient, and I think that's where we need to be willing to sit in silence so that they know they're not alone.
So you're making 2 really important points. The first thing is listening first, right? Letting the young person tell you what they need. But the second issue is also the response, right? How do you respond? I have a question for you, David. We just completed a poll, really interesting. We asked, what role does social media play in mental health for teens? You know, a lot of our communication goes over these mobile devices nowadays. And, you know, they're ubiquitous, right? Social media is all over the place. And we found that 1/3 of the people said that social media is mostly negative. It's a communication vehicle, but it's very manipulated. Social media is very manipulated interactions. 2/3 said it can have positive and negative effects, but nobody said it's mostly positive. How do you see these kinds of devices where a lot of communication is happening affecting teen mental health, or does it?
Yeah, you know, and I would just point out, you know, Mark, in the last, sorry, I have COVID brain. We were in March. I'd say in the last 6 months, you know, leading pediatric experts have signaled this mental health crisis among youth and teens across the country. And then the Surgeon General, my former colleague, Dr. Murthy, put out a report in December, an advisory calling out this crisis around youth and teen mental health. And what he did is he signaled in there around social media. He put a circle around social media, around the more around the concerns and you know, added sort of negative influence that social media can have on our nation's youth and teens.
As being a driver in a negative way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of mental health. And Dr. Murthy, I think, has also, there was just a study that basically talked about the interrelationship between physical and mental health as well, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, I would encourage everyone to read the advisory if you haven't already. I think it's, you know, beautifully written. The data points are compelling. And they rolled up a lot of best practice and, you know, really good advice also for the families, for the parents in reading through it, being a parent of teens. Oh my gosh. You know, it's just, it's very enlightening. And it's, you know, I'd say, pure Vivek. I mean, I think he's right on this right now, and so important to get this out. One thing I would say, just to go back to your point around stress, the numbers that we saw before COVID, youth and teen mental wellness numbers were very concerning, right? Very concerning before COVID. And since COVID, a lot of those numbers have actually worsened, right? And again, the conclusion by experts, researchers, again, is that stress, the trauma of the pandemic, family members being sick, caregivers being sick and dying, so many related things, isolation, being home from school, not being around teachers and caring adults, out of the house, has had this, increase of stress, increase of mental health disorders, substance use disorders. And, again, this conversation is so important. How do we turn a lot of those around?
So let's talk about turning those around, because we've already exhausted the topic of understanding, of listening, of meeting young people where they actually are and integrating this into our daily lives. Let's talk about the treatment approach. We're not talking about the traditional model of sitting somebody down in some couch where the therapist sits there with a notepad and is taking notes and is asking about your dreams, right? You're engaged much more of an interactive dialogue, and also one in which the youth themselves are the expert in what they are experiencing. Could you talk a little bit about the attitude that your staffs have toward the expertise of the youth as their own guide for their own mental health treatment? Marico?
Definitely. A couple of things to unpack there. One is, yes, children are far more like, when they are the ones dropping in seeking counseling, they're driving in many ways their treatment, but we are mindful that they are still a child, and
Right.
that the most effective way to address their challenges is to involve the family. Absolutely, there are times where parents may actually be contributing to that, and we will seek what we call our minor consent. But a lot of these dynamics are family dynamics. And so I want to be mindful that for any parents that are listening, they're not being excluded from the equation. But yes, children are far more likely to drive their success if they are the ones coming in seeking treatment. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it across the board. The stigma is decreasing with minors the younger we get, because we have this open conversation about mental health. I think our biggest issue is now that we have them, to the intake, having the time to provide that treatment, and then having that time to send them to an appropriate outside provider, again, if we realize that it's not a school-based model. As I share with other colleagues, there are just certain issues that cannot be unpacked in a school. It's not appropriate. And then, you can't have someone open up and then send them to math class. And that's why these conversations with David and partnerships with agencies that can work with families and provide that treatment in a safe environment outside of a campus is vital.
David, could you describe some of the treatment services that you provide?
Yes, I'd be happy to, Mark. We are a community-based nonprofit. We, like Marico, we have both on-campus and site-based, agency site-based outpatient services. We also have prevention. We're moving out more into population-based prevention, early intervention. Again, because trying to move the dial on this, as Marico said, I think is so important to talk wellness before you get to a point where you need, crisis intervention. And we have mental health first aid programs. And again, I want to underscore that they also include in the mental health first aid. That also includes substance use disorders, how to spot early, how to prevent. The longer we can go to delay a young person's use closer to 21, data has shown they almost have a 0% chance of having a substance use disorder. So the later we can delay use, again, decreases chances of substance use disorder.
Well, and substance use disorder is a form of self-medication. So is self-harm, right? The release you get from self-harm. So is acting out, right? All these different behaviors, which were seen as flaws in a person's character, are now being reinterpreted as symptoms of psychic pain. That actually those symptoms can be treated if we get down to root causes. And that's not an event, it's a process, isn't it, David?
I mean, it absolutely is. And Mark, I've been a social worker for 30 years, working with kids, everybody else's kids, they're adult kids. But I have to say, we are consumers of services, our family. And I wasn't able to see, anxiety and mental health issues in my own child, and it got to more crisis, we, my wife and I, we immediately opened up to therapy, and we engaged our insurance carrier and all. It got pretty bad. It got worse. But since then, again, I've had to deal with that sense of sort of failure, stigma, all kinds of things. And I'm in the field, I'm in the field. I should know better. And
you're not alone. There's so many different people. I have a colleague and a friend who was a head of school, and newly minted head of school, very prestigious independent school. And his first case was when he learned that his son had a substance use disorder challenge. In my own circle, close circle, in addition to that, we have family members who engage in different forms of self-harm as a way to release. In my own upbringing as a child, I experienced things that now, in retrospect, I understand better than I did previously. You're not alone. You're not alone. It really does affect us all, and it's not because we're clueless. It's just that we're living lives, and then we learn. And the importance is in how you respond and how your family responds. I really admire the fact that you're even willing to share with us, which is so informative to us all. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And just by sharing, I think for many, again, that stigma, we're trying to erase that stigma that it's okay to ask for help. And as parents, as a parent myself, we know how difficult it is to be a parent, especially during these times. One statistic I share, during COVID, we had a 700% increase from one of our school districts from parents who were now distance learning with their children, and they didn't understand how challenging it was, and they themselves needed that assistance. So I think we're all struggling in our own ways, and kudos to Oppenheim for raising this issue and really tackling this in an open conversation.
Well, I think there's another aspect here that you're both raising, and I think this is really important. It's the idea of treatment being a holistic process. And that's the thing that I think it actually gives us a path toward a societal healing as well as an individual one. These threads of mental health needs, that's me. That's me personally. That's my parents and my children, right? It's my aunts and my uncles and my cousins and my nieces and nephews. It's my friends. We're all in this together. And maybe the mental health approach is just to sit down and chat one evening and just talk about the things that concern us. Or maybe it's working with a therapist. Who knows, David, right? I mean, it could be, it's all of the above. And sometimes a therapist can talk about something that people who know us, we can't approach them.
Absolutely. You know, and I think that, you know, I appreciate your message earlier too, Mark. I mean, and you know, Marico as well, you know, because this affects all stratas, all demographics, it's the great equalizer, right? I mean, is behavioral health
issues, creeds, color, income level, right. everybody, ability, disability, it doesn't matter. It's all of us.
It's amazing. And that the recovery side of it also is the most amazing equalizer across all demographics. And it's such an empowering, you know, strength-based community to be a part of and to witness, to see our daughter learning skills and, you know, life skills that we thought we were teaching her and we thought we were practicing, and lo and behold, we needed some help.
And we need an education as well, right? So it's,
you know, I'm a social worker. I'm an Asian male social worker. I thought I was the best listener in the world. My gosh, you know, I had to learn a few things, and still practicing and still learning. But you know, it again, it's being in that community of wellness, of recovery, of hope, and you know, it's helped through the pandemic, and still. It's the gift that keeps giving.
Oh, go ahead, Marico. You want to say something? So, so we also have to recognize that while we are all in this process, there are some places where the need is higher. So, let's talk a little bit about how you allocate your scarce resources, because a dollar cannot be spent twice on different things. When you look at how you allocate your resources, David, where is the most effective balance that you find both on the intake side and on the treatment side? How do you ensure that dollar that you're spending is most effectively spent?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I mean, one of the ways is, I think, by targeting, also knowing our data, like who is most impacted right now and where do we need to, you know, really to concentrate. And I would say that in the pandemic, it has made it very clear to the provider pool that folks who have had, there had been health inequities in, you know, pre-COVID, are really experiencing those inequities, behavioral health inequities in the pandemic even more. So groups that, you know, I think of LGBTQ youth, and, you know, kids of color, low income kids, rural kids who maybe didn't have connections for virtual, you know, either appointments or what, you know, help. The data is showing us that where the impact has, you know.
So what you're saying is you follow the trauma, right?
I mean, right now with scarce resources, yeah, with scarce resources, as you said, you know, we have to look at the data. We have to find out where those the highest need groups right now. And, you know, and the thing is, it's hard because there are high need groups everywhere. That's again, as we said, this is the great equalizer. So,
are you also, Marico, when you go into a school and you're trying, you know, if you look at kids in a school, there are certain kids who are more likely to experience trauma, as David indicated. So you kind of have to look at data and you have to sort of align your resources and your approaches accordingly. Are you also going in that way, or are you just sort of being present and you're making yourselves available and allowing the students to basically self-select?
A combination of all of the above. By being by being there and having that presence, we're open for any drop-ins or what we call crisis. But I think by being on a campus and having that psychoeducation with school staff, that's where we are able to best allocate our resources. Really working with our schools so that they understand how to help triage, and what comes to us counselors is at a different level than what maybe the academic counselor or maybe what the school staff could help mitigate. So really working in partnership with the school so that we're doing a triage amongst ourselves of who will get a referral for counseling, and then ultimately being available and having time so that for students that are dropping in, we have the capabilities. But you know, with community-based organizations like ours, there's never enough resources. So data always helps. And for those that are thinking about how to help agencies like ours, I mean, we always need more resources for data. That's where we can help drive our research and drive the programs that need to be changed.
That's just a great point to end on, Marico. Thank you so much. I think that the biggest takeaway that I'm coming away with is that we are constantly needing to be attentive to each other, really listen, and try to respond without an expectation that somehow our response is going to be perfect, right? I mean, this is a process. Tomorrow we'll be smarter at that process than we are today. There is no silver bullet. And so just like everything else in our lives, we have to just keep trying and doing what we can, starting off with listening and then trying to respond in ways that are meaningful to our youth. Marico Sayoc, Executive Director of CASSY, Counseling and Support Services for Youth. David Mineta, President and CEO of Momentum for Health California. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing this really important topic with us all. And come again on next Tuesday. We'll have another show, and hopefully the next one is going to be on biodiversity. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Have a good day, David. Good to see you.
Great job. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.